And tonight, country constitution, the high court, and the service members who might be caught in the middle, former generals and admirals, are taking the dramatic step of submitting a brief to the justices outlining how making presidents absolutely immune would, quote, threaten the military's role in American society. The dozen-plus officials say that if the court sides with the former president, they will forever alter the meaning of the oath that every single service member takes to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, by obeying potentially illegal orders from a president of the United States. The former high-ranking officials envision a future where service members will be placed in the impossible position of having to choose between following their commander-in-chief and obeying the laws that were enacted by Congress. The list of notable names attached to this briefing is not short. Several retired generals, a retired admiral, a former CIA director, and also my next guest, Louis Caldera. He served as the Secretary of the Army under President Clinton. Sir, thank you very much for staying up with us tonight. It is highly unusual to see these kinds of officials, military officers and others, former ones, weighing in on a politically charged issue like this. Why did you decide to do it?
Abby, thank you for having me. You know, it is very unusual, and the reason is because the stakes are so high for our national security and for our military. If they weren't, I don't think you would see this kind of brief. But, you know, a brief like this is a brief to the court, as an amicus brief means a friend of the court, bringing to the justices' attention matters that they may not be expert in. No member of the Supreme Court served in the military. And so to increase their understanding of the nature of our military, its foundations, how it operates, and what the implications of finding that a president would be immune from criminal actions. And we think it would have a disastrous effect on our national security, including for the reasons you mentioned. It would put military personnel in a terrible position.
The reality is that there's a possibility the next president of the United States could be Donald Trump. If that's the case, what are you most afraid of?
Well, it's not just about Donald Trump, because if the justices say that this is the law of the land, that the president can violate criminal laws as long as he has, you know, some rationalization of why he thinks it's in the country's best interest. And one thing we know about former President Trump is that he can rationalize everything as perfect and in the country's best interest when it's really about his own political interests or personal financial interests. If that's all it takes for a president to be able to violate the laws of the United States, and his own lawyers in the argument before the Court of Appeals were asked, does this mean that he could order the military to assassinate his political rivals? And their answer in the end was yes. Well, the president's not the one who's going to pull the trigger. He's going to order the military to do such an action, or he might order the military to quash the constitutional rights of Americans who are protesting, as they have a right to do, whether they're protesting for racial equality or whether they're protesting against abortion rights. Americans have the right to protest. And yet he wanted to use the military to quash these protests. That's a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, which says you cannot use the military for civilian law enforcement purposes. And we have these laws for a reason.
Point, but I do want to play for you what former Defense Secretary Mark Esper said about this on CNN earlier today.
I would prefer to see retired admirals and generals not get involved in these issues. It's not even worth kind of talking about. It's just ridiculous.
He called it just ridiculous. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think he's just wrong. And in fact, his situation really illustrates our point, is that to have in our country, we have civilian control of the military. That is, the military is responsive to the president's commander-in-chief and to the civilians like Mark Esper, who are appointed to run the Department of Defense. But they have to work hand in glove with military leaders, some of whom have spent 30, 40 years in uniform, steeped in military affairs, dedicated their lives to defending our country. And that And they ultimately follow the directions of the civilians because that's the way our Constitution was set up. But that only works if you have deep trust between the civilians and the military leaders that we have one purpose: to defend the Constitution, to defend the country, to be apolitical, to stand up for the rule of law. And if the president transmits orders that say violate the law and then expects the military to violate the law when they've sworn to uphold the Constitution, and when they can be prosecuted for violating the law. So maybe the president would be immune, not subject to prosecution, but the military wouldn't. From the generals down to the soldiers would not be immune from prosecution. You put them in a terrible bind. You destroy the trust that has to exist between civilian and military leaders. You put military service members in jeopardy. That can do nothing but destroy the bedrock principles on which our military operates, cause Americans to wonder why they should support our military or ask their sons and daughters to serve when it's being used for political ends. It can cheer our enemies in foreign countries that would do us harm because they're sitting there saying, you know, this democracy that they keep talking about is a figment of imagination. Their president can order the military to do illegal things just like ours can. That's not what the founders had in mind when they created our Constitution. That's what we're worried about. And because this is such a serious subject is why people overcome their hesitancy to involve themselves in these kinds of matters and say, wait, this is just wrong for our country. It's wrong for our military. It's wrong for the role that our country should play in the world, defending democracy, defending the rule of law, not violating the rule of law.
And if you've spent any time around people who were at the highest levels of the military, you understand how hesitant, as you put it, they are to weigh in on matters like this. So it is extraordinary that they have. Former Army Secretary Caldera, thank you very much for speaking with us tonight.